I'm done here, I announced firmly. Fine, and don't think about coming back, my wife retorted sharply. Usually, I'd throw a curse or two as I stormed out, but today I aimed for a more refined exit. We've exchanged our fair share of insults over our 14 years together, but this time, I'm not coming back. In a few days, she'll understand I'm serious. For the past 6 months, Leah, my wife, had become a verbal wrecking ball. I couldn't make sense of it. Her cutting remarks, to say the least, were painful. I began avoiding her just to keep things from exploding. Each day, I'd linger in my car longer than necessary. Sometimes I'd sneak back home after Leah and Megan, our 13-year-old daughter, had finished their dinner. I had to look after myself. Sometimes there'd be leftovers, but lately, they seemed to disappear before I got back. My name's Ryan Baczewski. Technically, it's Luke Ryan Baczewski, but since my dad is also named Luke, they started calling me Ryan to avoid confusion. Nope, not a junior. My dad's full name is Luke Max Baczewski. I don't get why he skipped the junior title. I wouldn't have minded being called Junior or even DJ. But no, just Ryan or Nada. Yep, I'm Polish. Well, sort of an American with Polish ancestry. I've heard all the jokes. Well, most of them. They keep coming up with new ones every year. As the only Pole I know, aside from my dad, in this town of 10,000, I've become the punchline. Technically, I'm half Polish. The other half from my mom's side includes German, French, Irish, and English. But since I'm a Baczewski, people just see me as Polish. My soon-to-be ex-wife isn't who I thought she was. I only discovered this 4 weeks ago. As I mentioned, I'd been avoiding her due to her constant verbal abuse. After a few nights of missing dinners, I ended up at a diner one Monday evening. Settling into a booth and ready to order, I overheard 2 guys chatting in the next booth. I caught a snippet about Poles and tuned in. One of them asked, "So how long have you been with the Setus, Mrs.?" Since they got hitched, the other voice, which I recognized as my best friend Eric Carey's, replied, "Heck, I even slept with her on their wedding day, and he's none the wiser." I froze. They kept talking, but I was too stunned to absorb anything until Eric admitted, "Yeah, we meet at least twice a month." Ryan's so clueless he doesn't have a clue. I was in shock. When the waitress came to take my order, I mumbled, "Sorry, I need to leave," and hurried out, making sure they didn't spot me. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Leah, my wife, with my best friend, the guy who stood by me at the altar. Eric is also my go-to mechanic, though technically he's not on staff. He's more like a specialized contractor who handles all the repairs and inspections for my used car dealership. Yep, I'm a used car salesman. Heard all the jokes about it, but my business is thriving. People trust that they're getting good cars at fair prices, and if any problems arise, I deal with them. Eric has always done a top-notch job, and I keep him busy and well-paid. I tried to bring him on full-time, but he joked about not respecting himself if he worked for a Pole. He said it as a joke, but I felt there was some truth to it. I kept him as an independent contractor, even though he wasn't all that independent. In reality, I was his only client, and that fact will be his downfall. As I drove away from the diner, I struggled to believe what I'd heard. Was it true or just Eric's boasting? They might have hired a private investigator, but if their meetings were as infrequent as Eric claimed, it might not be worth the expense. Still, I decided to dig through Leah's phone and email. When I got home, Leah was acting her usual self, perfectly fine with me. I needed to find out the truth before confronting her. Once she was asleep, I checked her email. It was clean. Her phone was locked, but I managed to crack it quickly using our daughter's birth date. I found a few questionable messages, but nothing from Eric. His name in her contacts didn't seem out of place, considering he was my friend. Maybe he was just talking big. But Leah's recent behavior suggested something was off, maybe not with Eric, but with someone else that I went to bed feeling restless. I didn't fall asleep until after 2:43 a.m. The next day at the dealership, Eric cracked his usual Polish jokes. Normally, I'd let them go, but today I snapped. Eric, what do you even know about Poland? Bet you couldn't find it on a map if your life depended on it. You joke about Poles being stupid, but I bet they could locate the US, maybe even our state. Now, get to work. Eric looked taken aback, clearly caught off guard. He realized I was onto something. He wasn't the scholarly type, more street smart and good with engines rather than textbooks. That's why we got along in high school. I'd help him with his studies to ensure he graduated. Now, I'm rethinking our friendship. He made me question my choice in a spouse. I retreated to my office, shut the door, and considered how to gather evidence. Confronting them directly wouldn't work, they'd just deny it. I needed solid proof. I called a private investigator in Santa Fe and explained my concerns. He said tracking them would be expensive, given their irregular meetings, but suggested putting a tracker on her phone. At least you'll know where she is with a tracker or if you set up cameras at home. But unless you invest in high-quality, expensive cameras, they'll probably get spotted. Even with the best equipment, if she's paying attention, she might notice. If I were you, I'd use a tracking app on her phone and hope to catch them in the act. He recommended a tracking program and offered it for free, saying, "Consider it a gift. Everything I told you is online anyway." Still, his advice was valuable. I insisted on sending a check for his help. He said, "If you're ever in Silver City, stop by Baczewski's lot." I don't usually go that way, but if I do, I'll definitely look him up, I promised. And I believed he meant it. A lot of my success in sales comes from making people feel valued. I learned early on that everyone craves validation. That I opted for the tracking software, which saved me the trouble and expense of cameras that Leah might spot. That night, while everyone was asleep, I quietly installed the tracking app on her phone, syncing it with mine. It would run in the background without her knowing. Finally, I was able to sleep peacefully. The next day at work, I kept an eye on the app. Leah worked part-time at the university bookstore, putting in 15 to 20 hours a week. She called her earnings mad money and spent it on salon visits. She went to the grocery store and then returned home. Eric was at home most of the day, but whenever Leah was around, he was out working, so I figured nothing unusual had happened that day. That evening, I tried to be more considerate with Leah and our daughter, suggesting we go out for dinner. Leah seemed somewhat receptive, and our daughter, like any typical teenager, hesitated but eventually agreed. Dinner went well. I casually mentioned Eric, and Leah's discomfort was evident. She quickly changed the subject, which only fueled my suspicions. I needed to find out if Eric's claims had any truth to them. I had to get to the bottom of this. That night, I refrained from checking her phone, but I tried to see her calls and texts, coming up empty. Either she was deleting them swiftly or wasn't making any calls. As I climbed into bed, I thanked Leah for joining us for dinner. She responded, "Thank you, Ryan." It was a nice surprise, meeting my gaze. "You might be in luck tonight." "It's been a while," I said. We hadn't been getting along lately. After her usual routine in the bathroom, Leah came to bed beside me. I felt conflicted about being close to her. If she had been unfaithful, did I even want to be intimate with her? I decided to let her take the lead until I had solid proofs. I wouldn't initiate anything that we ended up being physically intimate, but it was rather ordinary. No need to go into details. At least I found some enjoyment in it. Throughout the week, I kept tracking her phone's location, finding nothing unusual. On Saturday night, while she was asleep, I checked her phone for any messages or calls, again finding nothing. I was nearly convinced Eric was just exaggerating, trying to impress someone with his tall tales. This wasn't the first time I'd known him to do so since our school days, tossing and turning in bed. I couldn't get any rest. At 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling and unable to sleep, I decided to head downstairs for a drink, hoping it might help me unwind. With a glass of Jack Daniels and Coke in one hand and her phone in the other, I decided to check it once more. Entering the password, our daughter's birthdate, I unlocked the phone and was struck by a realization. Our daughter's birthdate was significant. Leah's pregnancy had been difficult. We feared losing her several times due to complications with her Rh factor, which caused her body to reject the baby. Leah spent the last 3 weeks of her pregnancy on bed rest to ensure a safe delivery. Megan was born exactly 9 months after our wedding. We were thrilled to have a healthy baby, but she proved to be a challenging child. She cried a lot, had trouble sleeping, and struggled with nursing that in Megan's second year. Leah firmly declared we wouldn't have another child. It saddened me, but honestly, the baby had drained much of the joy from our lives. I mentioned she was born 9 months after our wedding, and people often call such children wedding night babies because they're conceived on the wedding night or during the honeymoon. A light bulb went off. If Eric's claims were true, Leah might already be pregnant. Before our wedding night, Leah had been on the pill. No, we didn't wait until marriage for physical intimacy. It was an important part of our relationship. The doctor had suggested that the stress of the wedding might have affected her hormones, making the pill ineffective. If the pill failed that night, it probably failed earlier as well. Now, I had a plan. There's a 50-50 chance I'm not the father. You know the saying, the early bird gets the worm? Well, Eric might have been the early bird, but in this case, it seems the early worm gets the birdie. I got up from the couch and headed to the bathroom, where I found some cotton swabs. Megan was sound asleep in her room. By the time she was 4, she finally settled into a stable sleep routine, after what had been a real struggle. She lay there snoring softly with her mouth open. It was easy to gently swab the inside of her cheek with a Q-tip without waking her. I sealed the sample in a plastic bag and then repeated the process for myself. Even if Megan turned out to be my biological daughter, it didn't answer the bigger question about Leah's faithfulness if she wasn't. But I pushed those thoughts aside for later. Sundays were reserved for chores, and we each had our assigned tasks. I took my time, deliberately avoiding Leah and Megan to keep my emotions in check. I was eager to confirm my suspicions but was plagued by doubt all day. "Something on your mind, Ryan?" Leah asked. I needed a quick excuse, so I said, "I'm planning to buy a bunch of cars at the next auction to stock up the lot. Money might be tight until I make some sales." "Just don't overextend," she advised, always referring to the business as ours, though it was really mine. I'd set it up as a separate entity to safeguard my personal finances. Living in a religious community, I didn't want my business decisions and negatively affecting my personal life. "I'm thinking of paying off the credit cards and keeping just one open to improve our credit," I told her. This was a tactic to disguise my real plan in case she found out later. "Do what you think is best," she responded indifferently. The idea hit me like a bolt of lightning. It's amazing what you can come up with when you really think about it. This strategy would minimize fallout if my suspicions proved true. Bright and early on Monday, I took the samples to Western New Mexico University and spoke with someone in the science department. They directed me to the department head, who was eager to help. I handed over some business cards and offered a 10% discount to anyone working on the samples. He seemed appreciative. "I've been eyeing a new car to replace my Camry. I might come by to check out your selection. If nothing catches my eye, I'll work with you to find something," I mentioned. "Thank you, I'll keep that in mind," he replied. As I left the university, I knew I was smiling, but there was a hint of worry behind it. The test results could end my marriage. When I mentioned buying new cars to Leah, it was just a cover for my troubled thoughts. Still, the idea was growing on me. I called Seth, my accountant, loan officer, and occasional salesperson, into my office and shared my plans. "We're going to make this work," I assured him. There's something else, Seth, I continued. I want to clear the mortgage on my house. Can we arrange a lump sum payment? He said he'd crunch the numbers and get back to me after lunch. As Seth left, I considered contacting my lawyer for a family law referral. But I hesitated, thinking, let's wait and see the results first. I didn't have concrete evidence of infidelity yet. After lunch, Seth presented the spreadsheet, and we discussed the next steps for both plans. The next 2 days dragged on, each moment filled with anticipation for the DNA test results. Late Wednesday evening, the department head called to confirm the results and arrange a visit to discuss the car. When he arrived, I ushered him into my office. His expression spoke volumes before he even said a word. The samples aren't related, he confirmed. I nodded, the news hitting me hard even though I'd half expected it. He handed over the envelope with the results, and I noticed a shift in my demeanor. So, about that car you were interested in? I asked. Well, it might sound cliché, but I've hit the big 5-0 and am eyeing a sports car. Thinking about a Mazda Miata, I said. Although I didn't have one in stock, I promised to check the auction the next day for a well-maintained one. I'll call you this afternoon with any updates, I assured him as he left. I'd told Claire I might leave early, but I knew she wouldn't call. She rarely needed my help, managing most tasks herself. As I drove around the city, everything seemed different. I called my lawyer, who, though saddened by the news, referred me to a trusted colleague. After the call, I scheduled an evening appointment. The next day, while snacking at a restaurant, I reflected on the past 15 years. Had I truly wasted them? I couldn't even claim a child from this marriage. Though I still regarded Megan as my child in some ways, biologically she wasn't mine. What was my next step? I couldn't stay in denial any longer. I had been aware before, but now, there was no going back. One thing was certain, Eric would face consequences. It didn't matter that he'd been my closest friend for years. With friends like him, enemies seemed preferable. Leah would also face repercussions. I wondered if she even knew that Megan wasn't mine. Even if she didn't, she kept this truth hidden from me, the secret of her infidelity with my best man on our wedding day. Now, I had no reason to doubt what I'd overheard. She was meeting up with him at least twice a month. The anger within me started to build, and I knew I needed to be alone before it spiraled out of control. I should have called Leah to let her know I wouldn't be home that night, but I feared my emotions might lead me to do something regrettable. When I finally called her, she answered. Hello? Ryan? Hey, I'll be staying in Albuquerque tonight to prepare for the auction tomorrow at 8. Oh, she replied flatly. Well, okay then. Have a safe trip. My occasional trips to Albuquerque for auctions were rare, so this deviation was likely to raise some eyebrows. I wondered if she might take advantage of my absence. She'd need to come up with an excuse about Megan for my parents, which wouldn't be easy. Despite that, I kept a close eye on her phone tracker throughout the evening to see if she ventured out. I drove to Albuquerque with the goal of purchasing at least 20 cars, including a Mazda Miata. I planned to arrange for their pickup and delivery to my lot after the auction. Now, I faced the dilemma of who to trust for their mechanical inspection. I knew Eric wouldn't be getting any more business from me after his current inspections and repairs. Upon hearing I'd bought a bunch of cars, he'd likely see dollar signs and try to inflate his charges. I planned to keep this under wraps until the last moment. I needed to find a local auction dealer who could recommend a skilled and reliable mechanic for the inspections. Arriving in Albuquerque around 9 a.m., I checked into a Best Western. Despite owning the business, I couldn't justify splurging on an expensive hotel with company funds. The room was comfortable enough, and the bed was just what I needed. I'm a simple guy with simple needs. Once settled, I immediately checked Leah's phone tracker. It showed she was still at home, or at least her phone was. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Thoughts of her actions and motives consumed me. How could she justify her affair, especially on our wedding day, and continue it for who knows how long? I started reevaluating our marriage. It wasn't perfect, but I had believed in our exclusive love. Now I saw it as a mistake from the start. In the early years of our marriage, things hadn't been smooth. We hadn't planned on having a baby right away. We had agreed to wait 3 to 4 years before starting a family. Our plan was to have 3 kids before we got married. But Megan's arrival threw that plan out the window. Learning that my best friend was behind this disruption made all our struggles seem pointless. 14 years of effort felt wasted, with the good times overshadowed by this betrayal. If Leah hadn't been involved with Eric, maybe she would have conceived with me. Perhaps her pregnancy wouldn't have been so difficult, and we wouldn't have had such a challenging child, leading her to not want more kids. Eric had shattered my life by seducing my future wife on our wedding day, and now he entertained her at least twice a month while likely mocking me. He needed to face consequences, I thought as I tried to calm myself and drift off to sleep. Anger simmered inside me. I needed to regain my composure or risk a sleepless night. I turned on the TV to watch a mindless comedy. The laughter helped soothe my nerves. By 11, I felt ready to sleep, looking forward to a busy day ahead. The auction went well. I scored some great cars at favorable prices and made valuable connections with Albuquerque dealers. I didn't spot any Miatas at the auction, so I asked around. 2 dealers had one each, a red and a black one. I negotiated potential deals, pending confirmation of my client's preferred color. Both dealers agreed to handle the transaction once I provided details of the cars on my lot. I should have visited this auction more often. Interacting with fellow businessmen inspired me to consider expanding my operations and provided a welcome distraction from my personal troubles. Later that afternoon, my meeting with the lawyer brought discouraging news. I faced losing half of my assets, along with alimony and child support for a child who wasn't even mine. At that moment, I decided against pursuing a divorce. Instead, I resolved to leave Leah with Eric's child, pay off the mortgage on our house, and let her stay there. With the mortgage solely in my name, she wouldn't be able to sell the house. She could continue covering taxes and utilities while living elsewhere but wouldn't have the option to claim the house for herself. However, I needed to address my business situation. Although it was registered as a corporation, I had a gut feeling that without proper protection, I might risk losing it. Consulting my business lawyer became a priority. Returning home, utterly exhausted from the day's demands, I informed Leah of my fatigue. I'm beat. Planning to shower and hit the sack, I muttered, making my way to the bedroom. Want dinner? Leah called after me. No. Had a late lunch, I replied, though her offer felt almost like a formality. The shower was a small escape, a chance to wash away the day's stress. As I stepped out and collapsed into bed, sleep came swiftly. For the first time in days, I felt a semblance of peace, with a plan starting to take shape. That I woke early, refreshed, and headed to the office before Leah and Megan stirred. Surrounded by spreadsheets and financial reports, I set my next moves in motion. I briefed Seth on the 23 cars I just acquired and instructed Claire to stop assigning work to Eric, emphasizing confidentiality. Her raised eyebrow didn't go unnoticed. You're the boss, she said. Thanks, Claire. I really appreciate your help, I said. At 9 sharp, I called my business lawyer for advice. Your business is registered, but she might still force a sale to claim half its value. You might consider selling preemptively, he suggested. I can't do that. It's my life's work, I replied, my voice tinged with frustration. Think about it. Let me know by the end of the week, he said. His advice weighed heavily on me. I'd invested so much into building this business, much like raising a child. Unlike Megan, I thought bitterly. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay focused. That I redirected my energy to my business agenda. First, I called Tyler about the Miatas. Tyler, Ryan Baczewski here. I've got intel on 2 Miatas, red and black. Interested? if the price is right, Tyler replied. Which color do you prefer? I asked. Red makes a bold statement but fades faster. Black is elegant, but heats up quickly. Planning to garage it? He asked. Yes, he confirmed. Red it is then. When can we meet? I inquired. Monday or Tuesday, he replied. Perfect. Call me when you arrive, I said. After hanging up, I called the dealer with the red Miata to negotiate a trade. He showed interest in the BMW on my lot, recognizing its potential value in a larger city. Meanwhile, Eric showed up with several cars still awaiting repairs. Despite my simmering anger, I had to keep it professional. Hey Ryan, when are the auction cars arriving? I want to schedule my repairs, he asked. The auction house will handle delivery, likely late next week or early the following, I informed him tersely. I managed a forced chuckle as he left, struggling to contain my emotions. That weekend, I kept my distance from Leah, focusing on yard work and errands. I no longer checked her phone tracker. My feelings had turned to contempt. Raising another man's child felt unforgivable. Monday found me back at the car show. I arranged the BMW trade for the Miata and drove to Albuquerque to finalize the deal. We'll grab lunch when you arrive, the dealer suggested. I informed Claire of my absence and instructed her to hold down the fort. Got it, boss, she said. Her reliability was a bright spot in my day. A raise was in order. The journey and lunch were pleasant, and I bonded with the dealer. Driving back in the Miata, the wind in my hair, I savored the brief escape from my troubles. Deciding to indulge further, I resolved to buy a black car as well. When I pulled into our driveway later, the new red sports car caught Leah's eye. She and Megan came outside to inspect it. Why do you need this car, honey? We need something with a back seat for Megan, Leah said, her tone dismissive. Picked it up from Albuquerque for a client. Thought you might want to take it for a spin, I said. No, honey, I'm not a fan of small cars, Leah retorted with a hint of disdain. Megan, I called, trying to involve her. No, Dad, I'm already teased enough because of my last name. I don't want to be seen with a Polish used car salesman. Megan's words stung, typical of a teenager's bluntness. I was taken aback. Where had this disrespect come from? Leah's nonchalance toward Megan's remark only deepened my frustration. Now, both the women in my house seem to dismiss my feelings. I'm going for another drive. I'll be back soon, I announced, shifting the car into reverse and driving off. Frustration guided my journey through Silver City, and I returned home around 9:30. I took a quick shower and crawled into bed. When I didn't come out, Leah entered the room, her frustration evident. Are you sulking because of the sports car? Aren't you going to spend time with your family? You're not just Polish, you're childish, she chided, her words cutting deeper than I'd expected. Her sudden shift in attitude was disorienting. It felt as though Eric's influence had turned Leah and even Megan against me, diminishing my heritage and the role I had played in their lives. The realization hit hard. Megan wasn't even my biological daughter. I'd supported her, but I had to face this uncomfortable truth. Looks like you and your daughter would rather do without a Pole around, so maybe I should just leave, I shot back, my voice laced with anger. Leah's dismissive demeanor only fueled the flames. She'd come to regret treating me this way. From that point on, the Baczewski household was cloaked in a frosty silence. The following day, I reached out to Tyler, who came over to check out the Miata. His enthusiasm was palpable. After going over the figures, he was pleasantly surprised by the deal, $3,000 below Kelley Blue Book value. As he finalized the paperwork, he mentioned, my best friend handles purchasing for the university, and we rotate about 16 cars every 2 years. It might not be much, but could you speak with him? Always happy to do business, and I'll make sure he gets a good deal, I promised. I'll have Oscar reach out by the end of the week. That's how I expanded my business, by treating people well and appreciating their referrals. On Wednesday, my lawyer called with a potential solution. Hey Ryan, I think I have something that might work. Can you swing by this afternoon to discuss? Absolutely, I replied, eager to hear the details. The tension at home was unbearable, and I was desperate for a way out. At the meeting, the plan unfolded. It would take about 2 weeks to execute, but it was promising. Over those weeks, I gradually moved my personal belongings and tools to a nearby apartment. Eric, waiting for the influx of cars, was kept in the dark with repeated delays. That weekend, I busied myself with yard work and clearing out my closet while Leah and Megan were out. Leah, preoccupied with laundry, didn't notice the thinning of my wardrobe. Monday night, when I told Leah I was leaving, her rudeness and disrespect escalated. Targeting my Polish heritage and my profession as a used car salesman, her remarks were the last straw. In the past, I might have stayed at a motel to cool off, but this time, I decided to take a different approach. The next Tuesday morning, I arrived at the office early and gathered my employees for the weekly meeting. It started off normally, but the air was thick with anticipation. Good morning, I began. As you know, the cars I purchased a couple of weeks ago arrived yesterday. They've all been inspected and prepped for sale. We won't be using Eric for any more work here. If he asks, just tell him we're going in a different direction. A collective murmur of surprise rippled through the room. You're like family to me, I continued, pausing to steady my voice, so it's tough to discuss what's next. I dabbed at a tear. I've sold the business. There were gasps and expressions of shock, but soon, congratulations began to flow, especially toward Claire, who would be taking on more responsibilities and receiving a raise. Claire, please stay after the meeting. We need to discuss a few things, I said. I'll still be around in an advisory capacity and might occasionally sell, but I don't want to interfere with your work, I assured her. Relief was evident on her face, even as she absorbed the news. After the meeting, Eric loitered by the office. Hey, why wasn't I included in the meeting? He asked, clearly annoyed. It was for staff only, and you're not an employee, I said curtly. He looked taken aback. I see the cars have arrived. I'll get to work on them, he said, though I could sense his frustration. No need. They've already been prepped for sale, I replied firmly, watching his face fall. But I always check the cars, he protested. Eric, I've sold the business. The new owner wants to take things in a different direction, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I knew I was barely containing my anger. I can't believe you sold the business, Eric exclaimed, making it about himself. Pick up your check for the past 2 weeks' work. It's not much. Claire rarely needed your services, I said bluntly. His expectation of working on the cars was dashed. I felt no sympathy, wishing I could tell him what I really thought of him. When I spoke with Claire, I asked her to keep our discussion confidential. Of course, Ryan. I'll keep everything private, she assured me. Here's the plan. I've set up companies registered in Nevada. One will buy the parking lot, the other will buy the company. I own all the shares in both. Eventually, I'll divorce Leah and make sure she doesn't get the business, I explained. Why? She asked. I've moved out. Leah doesn't know yet, but I'm not going back. She had an affair with Eric. Megan isn't my daughter. I suspect she might be Eric's. I'm not sure if Leah knows, but it doesn't matter anymore, I concluded, feeling a mixture of relief and bitterness. They'll find out soon enough. I'm not going to file for divorce, but I'll keep paying the utilities and taxes for the house so she can't claim abandonment and seize everything if she does. I don't want her to take over the business. That's why I agreed to the company being sold twice. Let them figure it out. The proceeds will be spent by the time the divorce goes through. Plus, I barely make anything from consulting and a few commissions anyway. I turned to Claire, who was absorbing the news with a mix of concern and curiosity. Claire, you'll handle daily operations from now on. I'll be available for questions, but I trust you and your judgment implicitly. Her initial smile at the prospect of the new owner quickly faded as she processed the details about Leah and Eric. Claire was someone I deeply admired and respected, and I could see the gravity of the situation in her eyes. I have one more task for you before I leave, I said. I need you to order a new sign and letterhead. We're changing the business name to Helpless Car. It will reinforce to Eric and Leah that the business is under new ownership. I spelled out the name to ensure there was no misunderstanding. Claire looked puzzled. I'll explain the name choice someday. For now, just know it tells the whole story, I added. Despite her confusion, she trusted me enough to follow through. With that, I bid farewell and headed out. I slid into my Audi and began the drive towards Albuquerque. About 2 hours in, my phone rang. I wasn't expecting her to call so soon. This had become a pattern. I'd leave for a day or two, she'd call, we'd talk, and I'd return. Things would briefly change, then revert to their previous state. We'd argue, and the cycle would continue. Deciding to answer, I put the call on speakerphone. Hello? I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Ryan, what's going on? Leah's voice was hesitant, tinged with confusion. Nothing much. Just heading to Albuquerque, I replied flatly. Why are you going there? She asked, her curiosity apparent. To pick up a car, I said, suppressing any emotion, so what I heard must not be true. Eric must have called you, figuratively speaking. Maybe he asked your mistress what's going on with her husband, she speculated. I don't know, I responded. What did you hear? She pressed. Eric called and said you sold the business, she revealed. Why would he call you? I asked, perplexed. He's your best friend, she corrected herself. He was curious if I knew. Best friend? What a joke, I thought bitterly. I was a fool to him, the clueless Pole, oblivious to his affair with my wife. Apparently, my family was embarrassed by my profession. Yes, I sold the business. Now you won't have to endure that stigma anymore. Shouldn't we have discussed this first? She asked, a hint of panic in her voice, likely worried about our financial stability. This is my company. I owned it before we got married, and I can sell it whenever I want. I just hope the new owner treats my former employees well. Did you get a good price for it? She fretted. I don't care. I needed a change, I replied. I'll start job hunting after I take some time off to relax. What about the mortgage? She asked anxiously. I used the money to pay off the house. You only need to worry about utilities and taxes. And now, what about food? Gas? Insurance? Her voice was almost hysterical. I guess I overlooked those, I admitted. Do you think you could work more hours? She suggested desperately. When are you coming home? She pressed, seeking reassurance. I won't be coming back, I said, trying to remain casual. Remember what you said when I left that evening? Don't worry, I'll figure out how to cover the bills so the power won't be shut off. You can't do this, Ryan. You need to come back, she pleaded, desperation clear in her voice. No, I really don't want to, I replied impassively. Ryan, please don't do this, she cried. I've already made my decision. What about your daughter? She tried to appeal to my emotions. You mean Megan, the girl who's ashamed of her last name and the fact that her father was or is a used car salesman? I retorted. She's just a 13-year-old girl. You can't take this to heart, Leah said. Well, it doesn't matter anymore. I won't be back, so none of you will have to be embarrassed by me, I said, my resolve firm. I ended the call and powered off my phone, leaving her to stew in her own thoughts. I knew she'd try calling me back and grow frustrated when I didn't answer. After calming down from the call, I continued my drive to Albuquerque, trying to enjoy the journey. I anticipated that her next move would be to contact Eric for more information and relay what I'd said. Upon reaching Albuquerque, I turned my phone back on and saw I had 5 missed messages, 3 from Leah, 1 from Eric, and 1 from Claire. I immediately called Claire. Hi Claire, sorry for missing your calls. I've been getting unwanted calls, I explained. Yes, I know. Your wife and Eric called me trying to find out where you were. I told them you don't own this place anymore and won't be coming back. Hope everything is okay, she said. Great, I replied. If they hassle you too much, tell them you'll call the police for harassment. I like that, she said, sounding relieved. Ryan, you might feel like you don't have family or friends anymore, but trust me, you do. We're your family and always will be, Claire said with sincerity. Thank you, Claire. You know just what to say. I hope your husband realizes how lucky he is, I remarked. Trust me, he does. He tells me all the time. Never take that for granted, she assured me. I won't, I promised. After ending the call, I debated whether to call Leah or Eric. But ultimately, I decided to let them stew. Exiting the Audi, I walked into the parking lot office where the owner awaited. I have that Audi I mentioned. Interested in discussing a swap, he proposed. Let's see, I replied that he admired the car's condition, inside, out, and under the hood. I could sell it in a week. Are you sure about this exchange? Feels like I'm getting the better end. You can return the favor sometime, he suggested. I'm not here to profit. Just want a sports car, I said. 30 minutes later, I was back on the road with the top down, enjoying the ride. I decided to head north to Santa Fe. Over the next 2 weeks, I traveled through northern New Mexico, Arizona, southern Utah, and Colorado. I stayed connected, checking in with Claire occasionally, and made sure she had everything she needed. Once things seemed settled, I ventured further west. Of course, Leah and Eric kept calling. Initially, their calls were annoying, then apologetic. Eventually, they veered into resentment. I listened but shrugged off their attempts to reach me. When they reported my canceled credit card, I chuckled. Eric even called me a villain for leaving Leah and Megan. I chuckled some more. My lawyer texted me with an update. Leah had threatened legal action if I didn't return. I called him back. Hello, Ryan speaking. So, your wife made threats? He asked. Yes, but as long as you're still paying on the house, she'll have a hard time proving anything. I can offer something better, though. I have a recording where I declare my departure, and she insists I don't come back. It's gold, send it my way, he requested. If she causes any trouble, I'll take it to her lawyer and let them sort it out. Thanks. I'll check in next week to see how it's going. I said that I continued roaming the Southwest. The Miata wasn't the coziest, but it was exhilarating. I caught glances and even a few admiring looks from bored middle-aged women, though I wasn't seeking that. I was still married, after all. I drove through Reno, Lake Tahoe, the coast, Napa Valley, and zigzagged along Highway 1. Yosemite, San Diego, Death Valley, Vegas, then Phoenix. There was no rush. I chatted with folks in parking lots, some envying a guy in his 30s who could just hit the road. After approximately 3 months and covering 8,000 miles, I decided to head back to Silver City. Upon arrival at Helpless Auto, I was warmly welcomed by my entire team, including a few new faces. They all expressed joy at my return. I walked into Claire's office, which was formerly mine. She looked up, and her smile widened even more. Rising from her chair, she walked around her desk and gave me a tight hug. After catching up, I asked, "Do you think I can treat everyone to food and drinks at Wrangler's? Can you close the store by 5? It's already 3, but absolutely. I'll make sure of it." The whole team will be there, she assured me. After bidding them farewell and announcing our meeting in 2 hours, I left them in high spirits. Next, I visited my lawyer. He informed me that Leah's attempt to claim abandonment to seize my assets had been thwarted. We discussed the next steps, and I felt a sense of relief. At 5, I joined the team at Wrangler's restaurant. We enjoyed a fantastic dinner, and it was delightful catching up with everyone. As the evening wound down, only Claire and I remained. She looked at me thoughtfully and said, "You know, Ryan, you might feel powerless and lost, but you're mistaken. You simply placed trust in those you loved." I met her gaze, grateful for her insight. "So, you figured it out?" "Yes, it took some time," she admitted. Your mention of the new name telling the whole story lingered in my mind until I understood. You may be Polish, but those jokes never truly define you. They insult your heritage and who you are. Thank you, Claire. You're the primary reason I returned. I had to see how you'd handle my responsibilities. I'm pleased to say you haven't filled my shoes. You've forged your own path," she expressed her gratitude, and we embraced. Then she left for her husband, who seemed genuinely content. I headed back to the apartment I hadn't visited in 3 months. The air was stale, so I opened the windows to let in the refreshing evening breeze. I grabbed a beer and settled on the terrace overlooking the pool. A few people were swimming, and a family enjoyed themselves nearby. As I sat there, my mind drifted back to Leah and me. We had once harbored lofty aspirations and dreams when we tied the knot. Now, they seemed to have vanished. Glancing at the wall clock, I noted it was around 8:30. A realization struck me. It was time for a confrontation. I rose, hopped into my Miata, and drove to my house. Technically, the house was still mine, as I had purchased it before marrying Leah, and my name alone was on the deed. As I pulled into the driveway, a wave of disappointment washed over me. The yard was a mess. Unruly weeds and overgrown grass testified to the neglect it had endured. The porch light was on, suggesting Leah was likely home. I approached the door and knocked. After a moment, Megan answered. Her eyes widened at the sight of me. Dad? Hi, Megan. Is your mom home? I asked gently. She hesitated, stuttering before yelling, Mother, from the kitchen. Leah's tense, high-pitched voice carried, What's the matter? Megan continued to stare at me, her confusion palpable. Leah appeared from around the corner, her face contorting in a mixture of alarm and irritation. What are you doing here? She shrieked. I opted to respond calmly to her outburst. Traveling, I said evenly, trying to maintain composure. Just then, Eric emerged from the bedroom, clad only in his underwear. Oh, I remarked, my voice tinged with dry humor. The whole family is here. Mom, Dad, and child. Leah's face turned a deeper shade of red as she snapped, What the hell are you talking about? I guess Eric has stepped in to fill my role after all, I said. It's rightfully his. Leah's confusion was evident, and Megan's face shifted to visible anger. I turned to Megan. Actually, young lady, you seem to be misinformed, I interjected, knowing she disliked being corrected. Eric never worked for me by his own choice, so I couldn't have fired him. And as for the bills, all utilities and car insurance are covered. Leah cut in with a note of frustration. What about groceries and gas for the car? You had a job. Did you lose it? It used to cover expenses while I was away. Do you think you can just waltz back in and take over? No, I said firmly. I'll wait until you and your partner find somewhere else to live. It was glaringly apparent that they were staying together in my house, and Megan seemed resigned to it. Despite the tension, Leah retorted, I'm not leaving my home. Correction, I said with finality, this is my home. It was mine before we married, and only my name is on the deed. You left, so now he's mine. Leah insisted defiantly. That's not how the law works, I said. Since I cover the utilities and taxes, I remain the legal owner. Even though I've been away briefly, it's still mine. Don't worry, I'll give you until the end of next month to find a new place. Just make sure you take your daughter with you. What do you mean, your daughter? Leah's voice was a mix of confusion and defensiveness. She's our daughter, Leah protested vehemently. You couldn't have said it more accurately, I chuckled bitterly. Leah's confusion was apparent. I turned to Megan. Megan, I know you dislike being called Polish, so here's some news. Your real father isn't me. It's Eric. The room fell into stunned silence. After a moment, Leah whispered, What? Yes, Leah, I continued. It seems your carelessness on our wedding day resulted in a child, but not mine. However, it's good news for you, Megan. You can now take your real father's last name and become Megan. I mused aloud. I wonder if perhaps Mom chose the name Megan out of respect for her lover. Leah and Eric exchanged frantic looks, the color draining from Eric's face as the truth sank in. What about you, Eric? Don't you want to step up as a father? I asked pointedly. Well, that's unfortunate, I said with a touch of sarcasm. It's time to take responsibility. But look on the bright side. It's just 4 more years until college. Leah and Eric nearly echoed each other in disbelief. I don't believe in that. With a swift motion, I handed them the DNA report. See for yourselves. They snatched the document from my hand, their eyes darting over the text. Eric's face went from shock to pale resignation as he slumped into a nearby chair. while Leah's anger seemed to dissolve into helplessness. They both collapsed under the weight of the revelation. "Megan, inform the lovebirds that your mom will be served with divorce papers next week, along with an eviction notice," I instructed before turning on my heel and walking away. As I walked down the driveway, a whirlwind of thoughts churned in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that this affair might have been ongoing throughout our marriage. Had Leah ever truly chosen me, or was I merely a pawn in her game? The betrayal left me feeling helpless, ignorant, and profoundly vulnerable. Eric had taunted me behind my back, cracking Polish jokes and belittling me. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. Back at the apartment, I sought solace in beer, trying to numb the ache of betrayal. The next morning, I visited my lawyer to initiate the divorce paperwork. Despite knowing I'd have to sell the house and split the proceeds, my barely working status meant I wouldn't owe alimony or child support, especially with another man now filling my place. At least, that was my hope. The betrayal by Leah and Eric had devastated me. Rebuilding trust with anyone, whether a man or a woman, felt like an insurmountable challenge. Therapy seemed like a viable option to address the wreckage left behind. As the divorce proceedings commenced, I returned to work at the dealership, making it clear to my colleagues that I was no longer the boss and only needed one sale per week to cover my expenses. I insisted on just one sale to meet my basic needs. Facing court-ordered child support, I ensured my bank accounts were emptied, leaving only enough to cover my essential needs at month's end. Leah had hired a lawyer, which puzzled me. Perhaps he worked pro bono. Regardless, they were in for a surprise. Despite scrutinizing my accounts and the sale itself, they failed to uncover anything substantial. From my colleagues, I learned that during my absence, Eric had visited the dealership almost daily for the first 2 weeks, desperately seeking work from Claire. However, she consistently turned him down. Eventually, he gave up and now regretted not obtaining his ASE certification, as his only job prospect was at Valvoline, performing quick oil changes for $13 an hour. I hoped Leah would be forced to work full-time, or they'd face financial struggles. I contacted the realtor and informed Leah that I was listing the house for sale, anticipating a 50-50 split of our assets. Since she had already received an eviction notice, she needed to vacate before the sale closed. One evening, Leah knocked on my door. After a brief hesitation, I reluctantly let her in. "What do you want, Leah?" I asked, trying to mask my wariness. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of desperation. "I'm not sure it's a good idea," I replied, my skepticism clear. "We're in a legal battle. Come on, Ryan. It's just us. No lawyers. Can we have a civil conversation?" she pleaded, her eyes searching mine. "All right," I said after a moment's thought. "But let's go to Denny's," I added with a touch of irony. "There'll be witnesses." I didn't trust her enough to be alone with her. At Denny's, after we exchanged initial pleasantries, I cut straight to the heart of the matter. "Why, Leah?" she hesitated, fiddling with her napkin. "I guess the simple answer is that I liked both of you and couldn't choose." "So you were seeing both of us at the same time?" I questioned, my voice tinged with disbelief. Leah looked down, her shoulders slumping as she admitted, "Yes, but Eric warned me not to tell you because he knew it would ruin your relationship with him." "Then why did you say yes when I proposed?" I pressed, my frustration rising. "Because I loved you," she replied, her voice faltering. "And Eric, I loved him too," Leah said softly. "But I knew he wouldn't make a good husband. So we ended things when you proposed, and I focused on us and our wedding plans." "So, on our wedding day, you were with him?" I probed further. Leah's eyes welled up with tears. "Yes, everything was a mess." "Then what was it?" I demanded, my voice a mixture of anger and sadness. "I didn't want to lose him," she confessed through her tears. "And he didn't want to lose me." "Well, now you have each other and your child," I said, my tone cold. "By the way, she did a great job with the name." I didn't even realize it until later. During my travels, I hadn't known Megan wasn't mine. "I didn't know Megan wasn't yours," I revealed, attempting to keep my voice steady. Leah looked at me with a pained expression. "Ryan, I still love you." "It's nice to hear, Leah," I replied, though my tone remained detached. "But I'm not sure you understand what love truly means. I loved you more than anything," she retorted, her voice rising with frustration. "And clearly, you can't say the same. I loved you," I stated firmly, "but now I feel nothing but contempt." Leah's realization hit her like a wave. She knew our relationship was irreparably damaged. "There would never be an us again," she said quietly, accepting the finality of our situation. Before she left, I had to ask one final question. "Have you ever stopped?" After a moment of hesitation, she decided to tell the truth. "We never ceased. We had our quiet times, but we typically met twice a month." She admitted that I had hoped for a different answer, but I appreciated her honesty. "One more thing," I said, my curiosity piqued. "About a year ago, your behavior towards me changed. What triggered it?" Her face flushed red, and then she grew slightly angry. "Eric started pushing for a bacchanalia not involving you. I might have considered it if you were involved, but we couldn't navigate it. His persistence made me resent you for something I knew you wouldn't agree to. It's odd, but I thought I could have both of my men together and resented you for not being open to it. Did you go through with it?" I asked, my voice steadied despite the storm of emotions. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I contemplated it. But then you left, and everything fell apart." "Well, now you're free to pursue it," I remarked, my tone cold. "Your choices don't affect me anymore." Sensing that our conversation was coming to an end, I settled the bill and we headed to our respective cars. 4 months later, we stood before a judge and finalized our divorce. Eric was present too, a silent witness to the end of our relationship. As we exited the courthouse, Leah suggested, "Maybe we can grab a drink, the traditional way." "Certainly," I agreed, though the word felt hollow. Despite the animosity of the past, it had dissipated. This moment marked the end of my association with them. They could now be together, wallowing in their own mess. They deserved each other, that I couldn't completely shake off the remnants of resentment. Leah would have to adjust to a lower standard of living, and despite the passage of time, the sting of betrayal still lingered. Perhaps the bitterness hadn't entirely faded. As a man of Polish heritage, I demanded respect, and this chapter was a stark reminder of how complicated love and trust could be.